What if the story of a family could be found not in photographs or letters but in the soil beneath their feet? Every meal we eat begins somewhere, long before food reaches a table, long before it is wrapped, shipped, or sold. It begins quietly, seed by seed, season by season, shaped by hands most of us will never see. This is not just a story about farming. It is a story about time, about a family who stood before wild land and chose to stay, about soil that remembered every mistake and every act of care, about generations who learned that survival was never guaranteed and that progress came only through patience. From the first plow-breaking, untouched earth, through war, loss, machines, and modern uncertainty. This is the journey of a farm that grew alongside a nation feeding not just itself, but people far beyond its fields. In this story, you won't find sudden victories or easy answers. You'll find quiet decisions, long seasons, and a legacy built slowly, one harvest at a time. Tonight, we follow that journey from dirt to dinner. Welcome to From Dirt to Dinner, a family's American farming legacy. Settle in and let the land tell its story. The land did not yet have a name. It stretched outward in quiet patience, rolling fields of tall grass, bending with the wind, soil untouched by iron or intention. In the late 19th century, before roads carved their lines into the earth, before fences divided one promise from another, this land simply existed. At dawn, mist rose gently from the ground, carrying the scent of damp soil and wild roots. The sky opened wide above it, pale and endless, as if daring anyone to believe that a future could be built here. To many, this place looked empty. To others, it looked unforgiving. But to one family, it looked like possibility. They arrived with a little more than a wagon, a few tools worn thin by previous labor, and a belief that land, if respected, could offer more than survival. It could offer a life. In those early days, America itself was still learning who it was becoming. The promise of land ownership had drawn families westward, away from crowded cities and fading opportunities. Farming was not romantic then. It was necessity. It was hunger staring down hope, and hope answering anyway. The family stood at the edge of their claim and took it in silently. No speeches were made. No celebrations followed. The land did not need words. The soil was dark and dense, rich with life unseen. Beneath the surface lay years of untouched potential nutrients locked away, waiting for the patient hands, willing to learn its moods. Farming in this era meant listening. The land taught lessons slowly, often harshly. They built their first shelter from timber pulled straight from nearby woods, rough beams, uneven corners, gaps that let the wind whisper through at night. It was enog. It had to be. Food was uncertain. Winters were long. Summers could betray with drought just as easily as they could bless with abundance. Every decision mattered: when to plant, when to rest, when to risk everything on a season that might fail. At night, by lamplight, plans were whispered. What crops might take hold, how much could be grown before frost, which mistakes could not be afforded again. The land listened. Early farming tools were simple and unforgiving. A plow pulled by animal strength cut into earth that had never known such intrusion. Each furrow felt like a negotiation between human effort and natural resistance. The ground did not yield easily, but when it did, it rewarded commitment. Blisters formed quickly. Muscles ached in unfamiliar ways. The body learned what the land demanded before the mind fully understood it. Days followed the sun. Work began before light touched the horizon and ended only when darkness made it impossible to continue. There were no weekends, no holidays, only seasons. Spring carried hope, fragile and green. Summer tested endurance. Autumn delivered judgment. Winter reminded them who truly held power. The first harvest was modest. No overflowing barns, no excess to boast about. But there was enough enoge to eat, enough to store, enough to continue. That was how success was measured then, not in profit, but in continuation. The family learned quickly that the land did not respond well to force. Overworking it brought exhaustion not only to the soil, but to those who depended on it. Fields left bare suffered. Crops planted too eagerly failed. So they adjusted. They watched how water moved across the ground after rain. They noted where frost lingered longest. They learned which parts of the land welcomed corn and which preferred grains or pasture. These lessons were not written down. They were carried in memory, passed through conversation, reinforced through repetition. Mistakes were expensive teachers. A poorly timed planting could mean months of hunger. A harsh winter could erase years of progress. And yet, each setback strengthened the bond between family and land. Leaving was always an option, but staying became a choice, renewed each morning. Neighbors were distant at first, scattered across miles of unsettled territory. But necessity created connection. When help arrived, it was remembered. When help was given, it was never forgotten. This was how community began, not from convenience, but from survival. Evenings were quiet. The wind moved through tall grass like breath. Stars filled the sky without competition from city lights. In those moments, the land felt immense, almost eternal, and the family felt small but not insignificant. They began to understand that farming was not about domination. It was about participation. They were not bending the land to their will, they were learning how to move with it. The soil darkened beneath planted rows. Seeds disappeared into earth with no guarantee of return. Faith was buried daily, one handful at a time. And slowly, something changed. The land, responded. Green shoots broke through the surface. Crops took shape. The fields no longer looked untouched, but they looked alive. With each passing season, the family's presence etched itself gently into the landscape. Not as scars, but as signatures. This land, once wild and unnamed, now carried memory. And though they could not yet see it, the foundation of a legacy had been laid not in stone, but in soil. Because long before food reached a table, before harvests fed distant cities, before generations inherited this ground, there was this moment. A moment when hope stood quietly before wild land and chose to stay. The land remembered, and the story began. The decision to farm is easy to imagine. The work itself is not. Once the land had been claimed and shelter raised, there was no more waiting. The soil had to be opened. Food did not grow on intention alone. The plow stood ready, simple, heavy, unforgiving. Iron edges dulled from previous use, wood handles smoothed by other hands in other places. It was not new. Nothing about this beginning was. Animals were harnessed early in the morning, their breath visible in the cool air. The ground, still damp from recent rain, looked softer than it truly was. Appearances, the family would soon learn, meant little in farming. The first pass of the plow was slow. The blade resisted the soil as if the earth itself was reluctant to be disturbed. The animals strained forward, hooves sinking slightly with each step. The person guiding the plow leaned into it, arms tight, back braced, learning quickly that balance mattered as much as strength. When the soil finally turned, it revealed a darker layer beneath, rich, heavy, alive. That moment carried weight. It was proof that the land could be worked, but it was also a warning. Every foot of ground would demand effort. The days that followed were measured not by hours, but by progress. One row finished. Another begun. Small victories accumulated slowly. Blisters formed, split, hardened, and became permanent. Muscles complained in ways unfamiliar to bodies unaccustomed to this kind of labor. There were no shortcuts. Every furrow required attention. Too shallow, and seeds would fail. Too deep, and they might never surface. The margin for error was narrow. Mistakes were immediate and unforgiving. The family learned quickly that farming required more than strength. It required observation. The soil behaved differently in different places. Some sections held moisture longer, others dried too quickly. Rocks surfaced unexpectedly, jolting the plow and threatening injury. Each interruption slowed progress, but each also taught something new. Midday breaks were brief. Food was simple bread, preserved meat, water drawn from nearby sources. Eating was functional, not leisurely. The work resumed as soon as bodies allowed. There was pressure in every movement. Planting too late could mean losing an entire season. Weather did not wait for readiness. The land operated on its own schedule. When seeds were finally planted, They disappeared quietly into the ground. There was no ceremony, no guarantee, just trust that effort would be answered. Waning followed work. That waiting was harder than expected. Each morning, someone checked the fields. At first, there was nothing to see. The ground looked unchanged, indifferent to what had been buried beneath it. Doubt crept in during those days. Had the rows been spaced correctly? Was the soil too cold, too wet? The land offered no reassurance. Then, slowly, signs appeared. Small green shoots pushed through the surface, uneven at first. Fragile, easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully. Those early sprouts mattered more than any later abundance. They were confirmation. Proof that the land was responding. But growth brought new challenges. Weeds emerged alongside crops, competing for nutrients and space. Removing them required patience and persistence. Left unchecked, they could undo weeks of labor. The family learned to recognize which plants belonged and which threatened the harvest. Pests followed, insects that fed indiscriminately, drawn by new life. Birds learned where seeds were easy to find. Each solution introduced another problem. Farming revealed itself as a constant series of adjustments. There were moments of frustration. Tools broke. Animals tired. Weather turned unexpectedly. Rain could arrive at the wrong moment, washing away careful work. Heat could linger too long, stressing young plants. These setbacks did not arrive dramatically. They arrived quietly, accumulating into exhaustion. Still, the work continued. As weeks passed, routines formed. Tasks became familiar. The body adapted. Movements grew more efficient. The land, once intimidating, became readable. The family began to understand that control was an illusion. What they could manage was a response. How quickly they adapted. How well they learned. By mid-season, the fields looked different. Rows were visible now, organized, intentional. The land no longer appeared untouched. It bore evidence of partnership. There was pride in that transformation, but also responsibility. Crops now depended on continued care. Walking away was no longer an option. The first harvest approached with quiet tension. No one spoke of yield expectations. Experience had already taught caution. When the time came, harvesting was deliberate. Crops were gathered by hand. Nothing was wasted. Everything was accounted for. The yield was modest but meaningful. It was enough to justify the effort. Enough to sustain the family. Enough to plan for another season. That harvest changed how the land was seen. It was no longer just potential, it was proven. But farming also changed how the family saw themselves. They were no longer settlers testing their luck. They were farmers. The land had accepted their labor, and in return, it had asked for commitment. Winter preparations followed quickly. Crops were stored carefully. Tools were repaired. Animals were tended with renewed attention. Mistakes made during the season were discussed openly, not with blame, but with intent to improve. The first plow had broken more than soil. It had broken assumptions. Farming was not simply hard work rewarded by harvest. It was a continuous conversation with the land, one that required humility as much as effort. As winter settled in and fields rested beneath frost, the family looked out across ground that now carried their marks. Furrows faded, but memory remained. They understood now that this was not a temporary undertaking. Each season built upon the last. Every decision echoed forward. The land remembered everything, and so did they. By spring, when the plow would return to the soil once more, they would come back changed, not hopeful beginners, but learners shaped by experience. The work had only begun. By the third year, the land was no longer a stranger. It was not friendly either, but it was familiar. The family had learned that farming was not a single act repeated endlessly. It was a cycle, a rhythm shaped by seasons that never hurried and never apologized. Spring returned with cautious promise. The soil thawed slowly, releasing the scent of earth and decay from the winter months. Fields that had slept under frost now waited again. Nothing about this waiting felt passive. Every day mattered. Planting began earlier than before, but not too early. Experience had taught restraint. 1 year of rushing seed into cold ground had ended in rot and disappointment. The land punished impatience quietly, so they watched. They tested the soil with bare hands. They listened to birds returning. They paid attention to small signs that could not be measured but could be trusted. When planting finally began, it was deliberate. Rows were straighter now, spacing more consistent. Mistakes still happened, but fewer of them. Summer arrived gradually, then all at once. Heat settled over the fields, heavy and relentless. Days stretched long, work days longer. Sunburn replaced frostbite. Water became precious. Crops grew quickly now, demanding attention almost daily. This was the season that broke the unprepared. Weeds surged with confidence. Insects multiplied. Rain sometimes refused to command when it did. It arrived violently, flattening young plants or washing soil from roots. There was no single enemy, just constant pressure. The family learned to work early in the morning and late in the evening. Midday heat forced rest, not by choice, but necessity. Bodies adjusted again, tougher than before, but never invincible. Clothing became practical rather than personal. Worn shirts, repaired trousers, boots shaped to the foot over time. Everything carried signs of repeated use. Nothing was wasted, not time, not material, not effort. Meals followed the rhythm of labor. Simple food eaten quickly, often standing. Hunger sharpened appreciation. There was no complaint, only consumption and return to work. Autumn approached with quiet authority. Crops matured unevenly. Some thrived dead, others struggled. The land did not guarantee fairness. It only reflected conditions and decisions. Harvest required judgment. Picking too early sacrificed yield. Waiting too long risked loss to weather or pests. Timing mattered more than strength now. The family moved carefully through the fields, evaluating each plant. Some years were better than others. This one was acceptable. Not abundant, but reliable. Reliability mattered. Storage followed harvest. Root cellars filled. Grain was dried and protected. Preservation was an art learned through failure. Improper storage could undo an entire season's work. Winter arrived without ceremony. Snow covered fields, erasing evidence of effort. Furrows disappeared. Crops vanished. The land looked unchanged once more. This used to feel discouraging. Now it felt necessary. Winter was not idle. Tools were repaired. Plans were discussed. Seeds were chosen carefully. Every decision now carried memory behind it. Evenings were longer. Work shifted indoors. Conversation replaced labor. Stories were told not for entertainment, but for instruction. Mistakes were remembered out loud so they would not be repeated. The seasons taught patience, because impatience had consequences. A drought year arrived without warning. Rain failed when it mattered most. Crops struggled visibly. Leaves curled inward. Conserving moisture growth slowed. There was nothing to be done but endure. Water was rationed. Fields were prioritized. Some sections were sacrificed to save others. These were difficult decisions, made without emotion, but never without weight. That harvest was poor. Not catastrophic, but humbling. The family adjusted expectations. Meals became simpler. Reserves were used carefully. Waste disappeared entirely. Everything had purpose. Spring returned again. The soil looked unchanged, but it was not. It remembered drought. It remembered rest. It remembered care. This time, the land responded better. The family had learned how to read subtle signals, where moisture lingered, which crops tolerated stress, which practices preserved soil health rather than exhausting it. These lessons did not come from books, they came from repetition. Patience grew quietly. It did not feel like growth while it happened. The children, once small enough to stay out of the fields now, worked alongside adults. Tasks were assigned carefully. Learning began early. They were not taught farming as an occupation. They were taught it as responsibility. The land demanded attention year after year. Leaving it unattended invited loss. Caring for it created continuity. Over time, the family stopped measuring success by harvest alone. They measured it by survival, by improvement, by understanding. Some years were generous, others were lean. None were wasted. The seasons shaped not just crops but character. There was discipline in routine, humility in failure, gratitude in success. The land did not reward emotion. It rewarded consistency. As years passed, fields stabilized, yields improved gradually. The family gained confidence but not arrogance. They had learned that the land allowed progress but punished complacency. Each season carried memory of the last. Farming was not a series of fresh starts. It was accumulation, and patience became the most valuable skill of all. Because the land did not respond to urgency. It responded to care. By the time the family looked across their fields at the end of another year, they no longer saw uncertainty. They saw patterns, and within those patterns, they saw a future slowly unfolding, season by season. At first, the farm was only a place of work. Every structure existed for a purpose. Every action served survival. The house was sheltered, not comfort. The land was labor, not belonging. But slowly, without announcement, something shifted. The farm began to feel lived in. It started inside the house. What had once been bare walls took on signs of routine. A table positioned near the window for better light. Hooks added near the door for coats and tools. Small repairs made, not because they were urgent, but because someone wanted things to last. Meals became more predictable, not plentiful, but steady. The family learned what the land could provide reliably and built their diet around it. Bread made from stored grain, vegetables preserved through careful planning. Meat used fully, with nothing wasted. The table became more than a place to eat. It became where decisions were made, where disagreements were settled, where plans were shaped and reshaped. Outside, the land also changed character. Paths formed naturally between buildings and fields. Areas once avoided became familiar. Fence lines went up not to claim ownership, but to protect what had been built. The farm was no longer something visited each morning. It was something inhabited at all hours. Children grew within these boundaries. Their understanding of the world formed around seasons, chores, and responsibility. Play happened between tasks, not instead of them. Freedom existed, but it was earned. Morning routines solidified. Before sunrise, work began. Animals were fed. Equipment was checked. The day took shape early and rarely changed course. There was comfort in predictability. Evenings slowed naturally. Work ended not when finished, but when light faded. Supper followed. Then quiet tasks, mending clothes, sharpening tools, planning tomorrow. Conversation filled the space between exhaustion and sleep. Stories of the day were shared not for drama, but for understanding. Small issues were addressed immediately. Larger ones were noted and returned to later. The farm demanded cooperation. No single person could manage everything alone. Roles emerged organically. Some tasks suited certain hands better than others. Respect grew from reliability. Mistakes were corrected openly. There was little room for pride. Farming had already taught humility. Holidays were modest. Celebrations aligned with agricultural milestones rather than calendars. A good harvest mattered more than any date. Gratitude followed abundance naturally. The seasons continued their cycle, but now they felt personal. Spring was no longer just planting, it was renewal. Summer was no longer endurance, it was growth. Autumn was not just harvest. It was reward. Winter was not absence, it was reflection. The house itself evolved. Additions were made slowly, only when necessary. Improvements reflected learning, better insulation, stronger storage, nothing excessive. Every change served function first. Comfort followed. Neighbors became part of the farm's life. Not besitters, but participants. Help was exchanged without formal agreement. Shared labor strengthened bonds. A barn raising brought people together for a single purpose. One day of collective effort could change a family's future. The favor would be returned when needed. Community formed quietly. The farm became a place known by others. Not famous but reliable. Someone who kept their word. Someone who helped when asked. Reputation mattered. Inside the family, identity took shape. Farming was no longer something they did. It was something they were. Children absorbed this understanding naturally. The land was not explained, it was experienced. Responsibility came before choice. As years passed, the farm accumulated history. A tree planted to mark an event. A fence repaired countless times. A field remembered for its failures or successes. These memories anchored the family. Even hardship felt different now. Losses still hurt, but they no longer threatened identity. The farm had proven resilient. Meals grew more meaningful. Food carried story. Each dish represented effort, patience, and cooperation. Eating together reinforced continuity. Even in silence, the act connected past work to present sustenance. The farm did not isolate the family from the world, oriented them within it. News arrived slower, but was weighed carefully. Changes beyond the farm were considered in terms of impact, not trend. The land remained central. Ownership began to feel less important than stewardship. The family understood that they were not the land's first caretakers, nor would they be the last. They were part of a longer sequence. That understanding shaped decisions. Short-term gain was balanced against long-term stability. The farm was not a resource to be used. It was something to be sustained. The house filled with sound. Footsteps, laughter, arguments, silence. All of it belonged. At night, when lamps were dimmed and work paused, the farm rested. Fields stretched out under starlight, unchanged yet shaped by human presence. The family slept, knowing the land would be there in the morning. This sense of permanence was new. The farm had become more than soil and labor. It had become memory, routine, identity. It was no longer just where they worked. It was where they belonged. No farm survived alone. Distance separated families, but necessity pulled them together. The land was vast, the work unending, and isolation left. Unchecked became dangerous. Neighbors were not chosen. They were discovered. A wagon on the road, smoke rising from a chimney miles away. Tracks in the snow leading toward another homestead. These small signs formed the first awareness that others were trying to build something similar, facing the same challenges. At first, help was cautious. A shared tool advice offered without expectation. Information about weather patterns or crop success. Nothing formal, nothing written. But when need arrived, suddenly, hesitation disappeared. A barn could not be raised by one family alone. The structure was too large. The beams too heavy, the risk too great. When the call went out, neighbors came. They arrived early, bringing tools, animals, and experience. Everyone understood their role. There was no time for instruction beyond necessity. Work began immediately. The barn rose in a single day, not because it was easy, but because cooperation made it possible. Meals were prepared by those not lifting beams. Children carried water. Someone kept watch for injuries. The entire effort operated without command. This was how rural community functioned, through shared understanding rather than hierarchy. The favor would be remembered. When illness struck, neighbors stepped in. Fields were tended. Animals fed. Work continued even when one household could not manage it alone. When death occurred, the community gathered quietly. Labor paused. Support replaced productivity. The land waited. No one questioned why. Survival required solidarity. Seasonal labor brought families together repeatedly. Harvests often overlapped. Extra hands meant faster completion, which reduced risk. Weather did not allow delays. Community knowledge became a shared resource. Someone always knew which crop handled drought better, which seed variety matured faster, which practices avoided disaster. These lessons traveled faster through conversation than any written record. The family became part of this network. Their farm no longer existed in isolation. It existed within a system of mutual dependence. Disagreements happened. Boundaries mattered. But conflicts rarely escalated. The cost of division was too high. Practicality overruled pride. Gatherings followed work. Meals shared after long days created bonds that outlasted the labor itself. Stories were exchanged. Laughter, soft exhaustion. Music appeared occasionally, simple instruments. Familiar tunes. Not entertainment for distraction, but connection through shared rhythm. Children learned community early. They saw cooperation modeled daily. They understood that strength was multiplied, not diminished, when shared. This understanding shaped behavior naturally. Markets began to form, small, informal exchanges of surplus goods. One farm traded grain for tools, another exchanged produce for livestock feed. Money existed, but barter remained common. Trust governed these exchanges. Reputation mattered. A family that cheated or failed to repay favors found help scarce when they needed it most. Winter sharpened community ties. Storms isolated farms for days. Roads disappeared under snow. Communication relied on proximity and preparation. Neighbors checked on one another when weather allowed. Assistance traveled slowly, but it traveled. Shared survival extended beyond labor. Information about distant events, political changes. Economic shifts arrived through these networks. News passed from mouth to mouth, filtered by relevance. The family listened carefully. Change beyond the farm often reached them indirectly, but its impact was real. As years passed, the community stabilized. New families arrived. Others left. Some farms failed. Others expanded. The landscape changed, but the pattern of cooperation remained. The family contributed more now. Their experience earned respect. They became advisors to newer settlers. Help flowed both ways. The barn raised years earlier now stood weathered, but strong, a reminder of what collective effort could achieve. Community did not erase hardship. It reduced its weight. When a crop failed, loss was shared through support. When success arrived, abundance spread naturally. This system was not sentimental. It was efficient. Farming demanded too much for isolation. The family's identity expanded. They were not only farmers, they were neighbors, contributors, dependable. The land shaped individuals, community shaped resilience. As time moved forward, the farm remained central, but it was no longer solitary. It existed within a web of human effort that extended beyond property lines. Survival was no longer a private struggle. It was solid. And that shared understanding would soon be tested by forces larger than any single farm. The land did not know about war. It continued its cycles without pause, spring, arriving on schedule, crops responding to weather, soil demanding care. But the people working the fields felt the change long before it reached them directly. News traveled slowly, carried through conversations. Newspapers passed from hand to hand, and letters read aloud at the table. At first, war felt distant, something happening elsewhere, beyond the boundaries of fields and fences. Then names were spoken. Young men from nearby farms left. Some returned briefly before leaving again. Others did not come back at all. The family felt the shift immediately. Labor disappeared. Familiar routines fractured. Work that once relied on many hands now fell to fewer. Fields still needed planting. Animals still needed feeding. The land did not adjust its demands. Those who remained adapted. Tasks were redistributed. Long days became longer. Children stepped into roles earlier than expected. Aging bodies carried heavier burdens. There was no ceremony in these transitions. Necessity moved faster than emotion. Letters arrived irregularly. Words from distant places filled with uncertainty. They spoke of conditions unlike anything known at home would. Cold, fear, waiting. The family listened quietly. There was little to say in response that would help. Work in the fields became quieter. Absence was felt in small ways: an empty seat at the table, tools unused, skills temporarily lost. Community tightened again. Neighbors helped where they could. Labor was shared more intentionally. No one questioned why help was needed. Women took on expanded responsibilities. Decisions once deferred were now made directly. Authority shifted not through declaration, but through action. The farm did not falter, but it strained. Harvests were smaller, not because the land failed, but because capacity had changed. Expectations adjusted accordingly. Loss arrived unevenly. Some families received letters that ended abruptly. Others waited months with no word. The uncertainty was often worse than the confirmation. The family learned how to continue working while holding worry. Fields were planted while minds wandered. Crops were harvested while hope and fear competed silently. There was no pause for grief. The land did not allow it. When war ended, it did not bring immediate relief. Returning soldiers carried change with them. Some returned altered by experience. Others did not return at all. The farm absorbed these absences slowly. Some fields went uncultivated for a season. Some plans were abandoned. Life did not reset, reformed. Those who came back brought new perspectives. They noticed inefficiencies. They questioned practices that once felt fixed. They had seen systems larger than the farm, and that awareness stayed with them. The family listened. Mechanization began to appear on nearby farms. New tools promised efficiency where labor was scarce. The idea was considered cautiously. Tradition still held weight, but necessity was persuasive. The land continued to anchor decisions. Community gatherings changed tone. Conversations reflected a broader world. Farming was no longer the only frame of reference. Yet the farm remained central. Loss left marks that did not fade quickly. A field remembered by who used to work it. A task that once belonged to someone no longer present. The family learned to carry memory alongside responsibility. War had not broken the farm, but it had reshaped it. The land endured, but the people working it were different now. Their understanding of risk, permanence, and fragility had expanded. They returned to routines with deeper awareness. The farm was not guaranteed. Neither were the people who sustained it. This awareness influenced choices. Conservatism increased. Risk was measured carefully. Stability mattered more than expansion. As seasons passed, the farm recovered its rhythm, but it was no longer untouched by the world beyond it. The fields had been worked through absence. The land remembered that too. And as peace settled unevenly, a new phase approached, one driven not by loss, but by shunned. Change arrived quietly, mounted on steel and driven by fuel. At first, machines appeared on neighboring farms, a tractor replacing animal teams. Mechanical harvesters reducing weeks of labor 2 days. These developments were watched carefully, without immediate adoption. The family had learned caution. New tools promised efficiencies, but they also brought cost, dependence, and unfamiliar risks. Still, the absence left by war had not been fully filled. Labor remained scarce. Bodies aged. The land's demands did not lessen. The question was no longer whether to change, but how. The first machine acquired was modest, reliable rather than impressive. It did not replace effort, it redirected it. Tasks, once dominated by a physical strain, now required attention, maintenance, and planning. Learning to use it took time. Mistakes happened quickly and expensively. Improper operation damaged equipment. Repairs demanded skills different from traditional farming knowledge. The family adapted. Workdays changed shape. Time once spent in repetitive labor shifted toward oversight and coordination. Efficiency increased, but so did complexity. The land responded differently now. Larger areas could be worked in shorter windows. Timing improved. Planting aligned more closely with optimal conditions. Harvests became more predictable, yet something intangible shifted. The physical connection to the land changed. Fewer hours spent directly touching soil. More time managing processes. Farming became less about endurance and more about judgment. This transition was not universally welcomed. Some family members resisted. They valued the intimacy of manual work. Others embraced the relief machines offered. Both perspectives were valid. The farm expanded its capacity gradually. Fields once left idle could now be cultivated. Crop diversity increased. Production scaled upward. This brought new considerations. Storage needed improvement. Markets expanded. Transportation became relevant. Farming was no longer isolated from broader systems. The family navigated this carefully. Debt was approached cautiously. Growth was measured against stability. Machines required fuel. Repairs required parts. Dependence on external supply chains increased. These were not minor changes, but the benefits were real. Labor shortages eased. Injuries decreased. Older family members remained productive longer. Children learned mechanical skills alongside agricultural ones. Knowledge expanded. The land, once worked by muscle alone, now responded to precision. Rows were straighter. Timing improved. Losses reduced. Still, machines did not eliminate uncertainty. Weather still ruled outcomes. Markets fluctuated. The land remained central. The meaning of work evolved. Farming was no longer solely defined by physical hardship. Decisions carried greater weight. Success depended on planning, not just effort. The family adjusted its identity accordingly. There were still farmers, but also operators, managers, learners. Community dynamics shifted as well. Barn raisings became less common. Cooperative labor declined slightly as machines replaced shared manpower. But support networks did not disappear. They adapted. Neighbors exchanged mechanical expertise now, borrowed equipment, shared repairs. The nature of cooperation changed, but its necessity remained. The farm became more integrated into national systems. Crop prices followed market trends. News influenced planning. External forces mattered more. This required awareness beyond the fields. The family responded thoughtfully. They remained grounded in land stewardship. Machines were tools, not replacements for judgment. Over time, efficiency became routine. The novelty faded. Machines became part of daily life. The land bore the marks of change, but not damage. Careful use preserved soil health. Lessons from earlier generations guided restraint. The family did not forget what came before. They remembered seasons shaped by muscle and patience. Machines did not erase that memory, they built upon it. Farming had changed, but its core remained. The land still demanded respect. The family still answered. And as production increased, the farm's reach extended beyond local community toward feeding people far removed from these fields. The farm no longer fed only those who worked it. That realization came gradually, not through announcement, but through routine. Grain left the fields in larger quantities. Trucks replaced wagons. Destinations stretched farther than neighboring towns. The family watched this shift with a mix of pride and caution. For generations, farming had meant producing enough energy to eat enough to store, enough to trade locally. Now, production was measured differently. Yield mattered. Consistency mattered. Reliability mattered. The country was growing. Cities expanded. Demand increased. Food systems stretched outward, pulling farms into a wider network. The family's crops entered that system quietly. They sold to buyers they never met. Their grain traveled routes they would never see. Somewhere far away, families ate meals that began in these fields without knowing their origin. This distance changed perspective. Farming was no longer just personal survival. It was contribution. The family understood that their decisions affected people beyond their immediate community. With that awareness came responsibility. Quality standards tightened. Timing mattered more. Buyers expected consistency, not improvisation. The farm adapted carefully. Storage improved. Record-keeping expanded. Crop planning considered market demand as well as soil health. These adjustments did not erase tradition, but they added layers of complexity. The land remained central. Overworking it for short-term gain was tempting. but the family resisted. They had seen what exhaustion did to soil and people alike. Instead, they balanced expansion with restraint. Fields were rotated more intentionally. Some land rested. Some was improved gradually. Productivity increased without sacrificing long-term health. Transportation reshaped farming life. Where once travel was rare and local, now regular trips connected the farm to markets, suppliers, and buyers. Roads mattered. Timing mattered. Weather affected not just crops but delivery. The family learned that farming extended beyond the field's edge. Logistics became part of the work. Community adapted as well. Farms specialized. Some focused on certain crops, others diversified. Cooperation continued, but competition appeared alongside it. This did not fracture relationships, but it changed them. The family navigated these dynamics carefully. They valued reputation. Reliability remained their strongest asset. Buyers returned because deliveries were consistent. Quality remained steady. Trust was maintained. That trust took years to build and moments to lose. The family understood that feeding a growing nation required discipline as much as effort. Technology continued to evolve. Better equipment improved efficiency. Communication improved coordination. Information arrived faster. Markets prices rose and fell unpredictably. The family learned to plan conservatively. Some years rewarded risk. Others punished it. Stability became the guiding principle. As production increased, the farm employed seasonal workers. Relationships shifted again. Management skills became necessary. The family adapted to this role cautiously. Fairness mattered. Work expectations were clear. Respect flowed both ways. The farm's identity expanded, but its values remained. Food production gained visibility nationally. Policies influenced farming decisions. Regulations appeared. Paperwork increased. These changes frustrated some, but ignoring them was not an option. The family approached compliance practically. They learned the systems without letting them define the farm's purpose. Feeding people remained the core mission. The land still dictated limits. No policy changed weather. No market eliminated uncertainty. The family stayed grounded in what they could control. As the nation grew more distant from its food sources, the family felt a quiet disconnect. People ate without seeing the effort behind each meal. This did not breed resentment, but it reinforced purpose. They knew where food came from. They knew its cost. That knowledge guided decisions. Children grew up understanding that their farm was part of something larger, not just a business, but a link in a chain stretching across the country. This awareness shaped ambition. Some saw opportunity. Others felt obligation. Both perspectives influenced the farm's future. The family discussed these changes openly. Expansion was considered, but never blindly pursued. They remembered earlier seasons. Scarcity, loss, community reliance. Growth did not erase memory. The land carried history in its layers. Each harvest added another. The family felt pride not in size, but in consistency. Feeding a growing nation did not mean abandoning roots. It meant honoring them through responsible contribution. The farm's work mattered more than ever, but its meaning had shifted. The family was no longer just sustaining themselves. They were sustaining others. And that understanding would soon challenge them to reconsider not just how much they produced, but how they cared for the land that made it possible. The land never forgot. Long after footprints faded and furrows softened, the soil held a memory. Every season left its traces invisible, others buried beneath layers of time. To the untrained eye, a field might look the same year after year. But to the family who worked it, it told a story, and they learned how to read it. The soil revealed where crops had struggled, where nutrients were depleted, where care had been patient, and where it had been rushed. It responded differently depending on how it had been treated before. This deep understanding didn't come overnight. It was built over decades, passed quietly from one generation to the next, like a treasured family secret. Certain fields were known for their generosity, always giving back more than was expected. Others demanded a bit more caution, a lighter touch. Some recovered quickly from stress, bouncing back after a hard season. while others needed time to rest and heal. The family stopped seeing the land as just a uniform, flat surface. It became a collection of unique histories, each field with its own personality and its own story to tell. Walking the fields became a practice of observation, not just inspection. It was about feeling the texture of the earth underfoot, noticing the subtle changes in color from one patch to another, and recognizing the patterns in how things grew. These details, these quiet whispers from the land, guided their decisions more reliably than any single season's results ever could. The soil also reflected human behavior. It was an honest mirror. Fields that had been pushed too hard, season after season, showed signs of fatigue. The yields would start to decline, the soil structure would weaken, and water would run off the surface instead of sinking in to nourish the roots. But the fields that had been respected, that had been treated as a partner, responded with an incredible resilience. This simple lesson reshaped their farming practices, quietly but permanently. So, they started rotating crops more thoughtfully, giving the soil a diverse diet. They learned to let the land rest, even when market prices were high and the temptation to plant was strong. It was a short-term sacrifice, yes, but it was an investment in long-term stability. They remembered the years of drought just as clearly as they remembered the years of abundance, and those memories taught them restraint. It was a powerful lesson in looking at the bigger picture. The children learned these lessons early on, not through boring lectures in a classroom, but through repetition, through feeling the dirt on their hands. They worked the same fields year after year, witnessing firsthand how the choices made today would echo far into the future. The soil became their most patient and profound teacher. This generational knowledge just accumulated without any formal records or textbooks. Certain practices were followed simply because they worked. Others were avoided because someone, long ago, had tried them and failed. Questions were always encouraged. Why did this field always produce better corn? Why did that section over there drain so poorly after a heavy rain? The answers weren't found in a manual. They were found through experience, through trial and error, and through paying close attention. Mistakes still happen, of course. Farming is never perfect, but fewer and fewer of those mistakes were repeated. The family came to understand that farming wasn't about controlling the land. It was about building a relationship with it. They spoke of their fields with a deep familiarity. This wasn't sentimentality. It was a profound respect born from a shared history. The idea of ownership started to matter less than the responsibility of stewardship. This soil had supported them through everything, through war and loss, through change and growth. It deserved that same care in return. Then came modern tools, offering new insights. Soil testing could now quantify what their observations had long suggested. The data confirmed the memories held in the land and in their minds. But the numbers never replaced their intuition. Instead, they supplemented it. The family learned to balance both the wisdom of their ancestors and the precision of modern science. It was the best of both worlds. And as time passed, the soil itself deepened. The organic matter increased, making it richer and darker. The structure improved, becoming more like a sponge that could hold water. The crops responded. You could see it, feel it. The land grew more resilient, more full of life. This wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of thousands of small decisions, made consistently, day after day, year after year. The family took a quiet, humble pride in this progress. But the soil also preserved the mistakes. You could still see the faint lines where old fences once stood, marking former boundaries. There were compacted areas that revealed where heavy equipment had once been overused. Certain stubborn patches resisted growth, serving as constant reminders of past neglect. These imperfections weren't hidden or covered up. They were acknowledged. They served as a potent reminder that the land always responds honestly. The family spoke of the soil as something alive, not in some abstract, poetic way, but in very practical terms. It needed balance. It reacted to stress. It recovered with care. This perspective shaped all of their long-term planning. Expansion slowed down. Conservation efforts increased. They shifted towards sustainable practices long before that word became trendy. They planted cover crops to protect the bare ground in winter. They reduced their tillage to preserve that precious soil structure. They intentionally addressed any signs of erosion, and the land responded. Their neighbors noticed. The fields just looked healthier. Conversations started over the fence line in the local co-op. The practices began to spread, not through preaching or instruction, but simply through observation. The family shared what they knew freely, without ever claiming to be the ultimate authority. Their experience and the health of their land spoke for itself. As generations changed, the soil remained the constant anchor, but its caretakers evolved. The younger members brought new ideas, fresh perspectives, and an eagerness for innovation. The older ones provided the crucial context, the history, the why, behind the what. Together, they evaluated every potential change carefully, always asking the most important question: what impact will this have on the land? This careful balance between tradition and progress preserved their continuity. The soil carried the weight of history so quietly. It had fed countless animals, nourished generations of families, sustained communities, and even sent food to distant cities. It had absorbed relentless rain, weathered crippling droughts, endured deep frosts, and baked under the summer heat. It had simply endured. The family recognized that their time with the land was temporary. They were just one chapter in a much longer story. This realization profoundly influenced their plans for the future, for their legacy. They didn't seek to extract the maximum value from the soil in their lifetime. They sought to leave the land better, healthier, and more alive than they found it. The soil would outlast them all. Their primary responsibility was to prepare it for those who would follow. This understanding brought a deep sense of humility. The land was not impressed by human ambition. It only responded to care. So the family continued their work with a renewed awareness. Every single seed they planted carried a memory. Every harvest they brought in reflected not just the work of the current season, but all the seasons that came before. The soil remembered everything, and through their careful, patient stewardship, it continued to give back, year after year, generation after generation. Crises did not arrive all at once. It built quietly, season by season, through pressures that seemed manageable individually, but overwhelming together. The land continued to produce, but the conditions surrounding it changed faster than experience alone could answer. Markets became unpredictable. Prices rose one year and collapsed the next. Costs increased steadily. Fuel, equipment, maintenance, while returns failed to keep pace. Planning grew difficult. Confidence thinned. The family adjusted cautiously at first. They trimmed expenses, delayed upgrades, worked longer hours to compensate. It helped, but not enough. Weather patterns shifted. Seasons grew less predictable. Rain came too late, or too heavy heat lingered. Frost arrived unexpectedly. The land responded unevenly. Some years were salvageable, others were not. The family felt pressure from every direction. Production demanded investment. Investment carried risk. Risk threatened stability. Decisions grew heavier. Debt, once avoided carefully, entered conversations. Not as ambition but as necessity. Equipment required replacement. Infrastructure demanded maintenance. Every choice was weighed against long-term survival. Community faced similar strain. Some farms expanded aggressively, hoping scale would protect them. Others diversified, sold land. Some disappeared quietly. These losses were felt deeply. Empty fields spoke of exhaustion. Abandoned structures reminded everyone that farming did not guarantee continuity. The family took note. They resisted panic. Stability remained their priority, but restraint alone could not solve everything. A particularly difficult year tested resolve. Rain failed, early heat followed. Crops struggled visibly. Insurance softened the blow, but not enough. Harvest was thin. The family gathered at the table with ledgers instead of celebration. Numbers replaced conversation. The reality was unavoidable. Change was required. They reviewed every aspect of the operation. Crop selection, equipment use, labor allocation, market, engagement. Nothing was sacred. Emotion was set aside. Survival demanded clarity. The land remained central to every decision. Exhausting it for short-term gain was rejected immediately. That path had ended farms before. Instead, the family explored alternatives. Diversification emerged as a possibility. not expansion but resilience. They tested new crops carefully, allocated small areas, watched. Results: some efforts failed. Others showed promise. They explored direct sales cautiously. Farmers markets, local buyers. Relationships formed again, this time beyond traditional channels. These efforts demanded new skills: communication, marketing, time away from fields. The family adapted. Not everyone agreed. Tension surfaced. Generational perspectives differed. These conversations were difficult but necessary. Respect remained intact, because the shared goal was clear: survive without losing identity. The land weathered the crisis better than expected. Years of careful stewardship paid dividends. Soil health buffered stress. Fields recovered faster than neighboring operations pushed too hard. This reinforced commitment to restraint. Gradually, conditions stabilized, but not permanently. The crisis left marks. Debt remained manageable, but present. Risk tolerance changed. Confidence matured. The family emerged more cautious but more capable. They had faced the limits of tradition and adapted without abandoning it. The farm did not return to ease, but it regained balance. Work continued with renewed focus. The family accepted that stability was not static. It required constant adjustment. Crisis clarified priorities. Scale mattered less than sustainability. Growth mattered less than resilience. The land had endured worse. It would endure again. The family understood now that farming required flexibility equal to effort. The crisis had tested them, and they remained stronger, not because conditions improved, but because understanding deepened. Survival demanded more than endurance. After years of pressure and uncertainty, the family understood that doing things the way they always had, even successfully, was no longer enough. The land had changed. The climate had shifted. Markets had evolved. Adaptation was no longer optional. But change would not come at the expense of the land. The family approached this moment carefully. They did not abandon tradition, they examined it. What worked remained. What harmed the land was questioned. What could be improved was tested. Observation guided every step. They began with the soil. Years of attention had already strengthened it, but new methods promised further resilience. Cover crops were introduced deliberately, not for yield but for protection. Bare fields no longer sat exposed to wind and rain. Living roots held soil in place. Organic matter increased. Moisture retention improved. The land responded. Reduced tillage followed. The plow, once centra, was used less aggressively. Soil structure improved. Microbial life increased. Erosion slowed. These changes required patience. Results were not immediate. Some yields dipped temporarily. Skepticism arose. The family persisted. They understood the recovery took time. Water management became a focus. Drainage improved. Irrigation adjusted. Conservation practices aligned with natural flow rather than fighting it. The land stabilized further. Technology supported these efforts. Precision tools reduced waste. Inputs were applied where needed, not everywhere. Efficiency improved without increasing pressure. The family monitored carefully. Data informed decisions, but intuition remained central. Community noticed again. Some neighbors adopted similar practices. Others waited. Conversations deepened. The family shared openly but did not persuade forcefully. Experience remained their strongest argument. This period reshaped identity. Farming was no longer defined by output alone. It was defined by balance. Children learned new language: sustainability, conservation, regeneration. These concepts were not abstract. They were visible. Fields held moisture longer. Crops weathered stress better. Wildlife returned. The land felt healthier. Markets slowly responded. Buyers recognized quality. Niche opportunities emerged. The family remained cautious. Trends came and went. Principles endured. They avoided chasing every innovation. They tested, observed, adjusted. This methodical approach preserved stability. Emotions softened during this phase. Fear receded. Confidence returned not as certainty, but as competence. The family no longer felt reactive. They felt deliberate. The land rewarded consistency. Years passed. Practices refined. Results accumulated. The farm did not become immune to hardship, but it became resilient. The family's relationship with the land deepened again. They were no longer correcting mistakes alone. They were building toward longevity. This shift carried philosophical weight. Farming was not extraction. It was participation. The family accepted their role as caretakers rather than controllers. This understanding influenced long-term planning. Succession discussions began quietly, not urgently but intentionally. The land would outlast them. Preparation mattered. The family's approach to farming had evolved without abandoning its roots. Old ways had been rethought, not rejected. And in that balance, the farm found renewed purpose. At some point, the language around the farm began to change. Not in documents or legal terms, but in conversation. The family spoke less about what they owned and more about what they were responsible for. This shift did not happen suddenly. It grew out of experience. Years of adapting, recovering, and rethinking had made one truth clear. The land was not something to be used up within a lifetime. It was something that required care beyond it. Ownership felt temporary. The family understood that the land had existed long before them and would remain long after they were gone. Their role was not to extract everything possible, but to pass it on in better condition than they had received it. This understanding influenced decisions in quiet but lasting ways. Fields were no longer evaluated solely by yield. They were assessed by health, soil structure, organic matter. Water retention and erosion risk became part of daily consideration. Short-term profit lost its authority. That did not mean the farm stopped being a business. It meant the business served a longer horizon. The family invested in practices that did not show immediate return. Tree lines were protected, buffer zones were maintained. Areas prone to erosion were taken out of production. These choices reduced acreage but increased stability. The land responded predictably. Water moved more slowly across fields. Soil stayed in place during storms. Crops experienced less stress. The family documented these changes carefully, not for recognition, but for understanding. Stewardship required awareness. The idea extended beyond soil. Water sources were protected. Chemical use was reduced where possible. Waste was managed deliberately. The family did not claim perfection. Farming still involved compromise, but intent mattered. They chose responsibility consistently. This perspective shaped how the farm interacted with the surrounding environment. Wildlife was no longer seen as competition alone. Balance became the goal. The farm integrated into its ecosystem rather than dominating it. Neighbors noticed. Some questioned the practicality of leaving land unused. Others recognized the long-term benefit. The family did not justify their choices. Results spoke over time. Stewardship also reshaped relationships within the family. Decisions were discussed across generations. Younger members brought new ideas. Older members offered context. Authority came from experience, not age. This collaboration strengthened continuity. The family no longer asked, "What will this yield next year?" without also asking, "What will this look like in 20 years?" That question guided planning. Succession discussions became concrete. Who would take responsibility next? Who understood the land deeply enough to care for it properly? Who was willing to accept not just ownership but obligation? These conversations were difficult. Not everyone wanted the same future. Some saw opportunity elsewhere. Others felt tied to the land. The family respected these differences. Stewardship did not mean forcing continuity. It meant ensuring readiness. If continuity was chosen, legal arrangements followed philosophy. Conservation agreements were explored. Long-term planning replaced assumption. The farm prepared for transition intentionally. This period was marked by calm. There was less urgency, less reaction, more intention. The land felt stable. Years of careful management had strengthened its resilience. The farm weathered difficult seasons without panic. This stability did not breed complacency. The family remained attentive. Stewardship required constant awareness. Markets still shifted. Weather still challenged. But decisions were no longer driven by fear. They were driven by values. The family recognized that stewardship extended beyond their boundaries. Their choices affected water downstream. Soil loss impacted others. Responsibility expanded outward. This awareness did not overwhelm it. Clarified, the farm was part of a larger system. Acting responsibly within it mattered. Children growing into adulthood understood this naturally. Stewardship was not taught, it was practiced. They saw how decisions accumulated, how restraint created resilience, how care produced continuity. The land reflected these choices visibly. Fields held their structure. Crops recovered more quickly from stress. Wildlife returned steadily. The farm was not pristine, but it was balanced. The family felt pride not in control, but in care. They did not see themselves as owners in the traditional sense. They saw themselves as temporary guardians. That perspective shaped every action. The land continued to give because it had been given time, and the family understood that their greatest contribution would not be a record harvest but a farm capable of continuing long after their involvement ended. Most people never saw the farm. They saw the end of the journey, food arranged neatly on shelves, meals prepared without visible effort. The distance between soil and table had grown wide, and for many, invisible. For the family, that distance became increasingly noticeable. Their crops left the fields and entered systems that moved quickly and efficiently. Trucks carried grain away. Buyers handled processing. Distributors managed logistics. By the time food reached consumers, the farm itself had vanished from the story. This was not new, but it became more apparent as food systems expanded. The family understood how necessary these systems were. Scale demanded efficiency. Cities depended on consistency, but something was lost along the way. The connection between effort and consumption weakened. The family did not resent this. They understood it. Modern life required distance. But they also recognized its consequences. When food feels abundant and effortless, its value changes. Waste increases. Understanding decreases. Responsibility diffuses. The family felt this gap more clearly as they engaged directly with consumers through new channels. Farmers markets, local buyers, community-supported programs. These interactions were different. People asked questions. Where did this come from? How was it grown? Why did it taste different? The family answered honestly. They explained seasons, weather, soil, decisions made months before a meal appeared. These conversations mattered. They reminded the family why they farmed carefully. They reminded consumers that food was not automatic. The distance shortened. Children accompanied adults to these markets. They observed how curiosity formed connection, how understanding fostered appreciation. The family saw that feeding people was not only about quantity but about trust. Trust grew when stories were shared. The family did not romanticize their work. They spoke practically. Farming was difficult. Mistakes happened. Nature remained unpredictable. But honesty resonated. Some consumers returned regularly. Relationships formed. Food became personal again. This reconnection did not replace large-scale distribution. It complemented it. The family maintained balance. They continued supplying broader markets while engaging locally where possible. This dual approach reinforced purpose. Seeing food consumed close to its origin clarified impact. Seeing it travel far reinforced responsibility. The family understood that modern food systems were complex and necessary, but connections still mattered. They adjusted communication accordingly. Labels became clearer. Practices were explained. Transparency increased. This effort required time, but it returned value. Consumers trusted consistency. Buyers valued reliability. The farm's reputation strengthened. The family recognized that their role extended beyond production. They were educators by example, not through instruction but through openness. They answered questions without defensiveness. They explained trade-offs. Honestly, this approach built respect. The distance between farm and fork remained, but it narrowed in meaningful ways. The family reflected on earlier generations. Those who ate what they grew, who understood effort intuitively. Modern consumers lacked that context not through fault, but through change. The family accepted this reality without judgment. Instead, they focused on bridging the gap where possible. Food became a conversation. This perspective influenced packaging, communication, and engagement. The farm told its story quietly through consistency. The family saw how understanding changed behavior. People wasted less when they knew more. They valued food differently. These small shifts mattered. The family also gained insight from consumers. Preferences changed. Dietary patterns evolved. They listened carefully. Not every trend was followed, but awareness informed planning. The farm adapted selectively. The land remained central. No consumer demand justified harming it. This principle guided decisions. The family remained committed to stewardship while participating fully in modern food systems. They accepted complexity. Food traveled far, but its origins remained rooted. The family took quiet pride in knowing that meals eaten miles away still began with care. They understood that feeding people was both practical and relational. The fork marked the end of a journey, but not the end of responsibility. The family continued working with awareness that each harvest carried not just calories but trust, and that trust was earned through consistency, care, and honesty. The children who grew up on the farm did not all experience it the same way. Some remembered freedom, open space, movement, responsibility earned early. Others remembered limits, long days, expectations, routines that rarely changed. The land shaped them all, but it did not decide their futures for them. As they grew older, the question became unavoidable. Would they stay? For earlier generations, the answer had been assumed. The farm needed hands. Survival required continuity. Leaving was rare and often impossible. Now, choice existed. Education extended beyond the farm. Opportunities appeared elsewhere. The world beyond the fields felt closer, more accessible. The family acknowledged this shift openly. They did not frame farming as obligation. They framed it as a responsibility, one that had to be chosen willingly to be carried well. Children learned the work early, not as burden, but as participation. They fed animals, worked fields, learned machines, observed discipline. They were included, not sheltered. At the same time, they were encouraged to explore beyond the farm. School mattered. Curiosity was supported. The family understood that forcing continuity often produced resentment rather than commitment. Conversations about the future began early but without pressure. Some children felt deeply connected to the land. They noticed soil changes instinctively. They understood seasons without explanation. They felt at home in routine. Others felt restless. They valued the farm but did not see themselves bound to it. The family respected both responses. As children reached adulthood, paths diverged. Some left for education or work, carrying farm values into other fields. Others stayed close, gradually assuming more responsibility. This transition required patience. Authority shifted slowly. Knowledge transferred deliberately. Decisions were shared before ownership changed. The family recognized that stewardship required readiness, not inheritance alone. Those who stayed learned to balance tradition with innovation. They brought new ideas cautiously, grounded in respect for what had come before. Those who left remained connected in different ways. They contributed perspective. They understood the farm's value from distance. The family avoided division by maintaining communication. The land remained common ground. Succession planning became more concrete. Legal arrangements were discussed, responsibilities outlined, expectations clarified. These conversations were difficult but necessary. Avoiding them risked misunderstanding. Addressing them preserved trust. The family understood that continuity was not guaranteed by bloodline alone. It required shared values. Some seasons were marked by uncertainty. A generation nearing retirement wondered whether the farm would continue under family care. Younger members weighed commitment against opportunity. No one rushed decisions. The land continued its cycles regardless. Gradually, clarity emerged. Those who felt called to steward the farm stepped forward. The farm's future took shape not through assumption but through choice. This choice strengthened continuity. Those who stayed did so with intention. They accepted responsibility fully. They did not romanticize the work. They understood its difficulty. But they also understood its meaning. They brought skills, learned elsewhere technology, communication, management, and integrated them carefully. The land adapted again. Older generations transitioned gradually. Guidance replaced authority. Presence replaced control. This shift was not easy. Letting go required trust. Trust was earned through preparation. The family saw continuity not as repetition but as each generation shaped the farm differently. The land absorbed these changes without complaint. Children who had once followed behind now led. They carried memory forward. They understood that stewardship required humility. They accepted that mistakes would still happen. The farm remained resilient because responsibility was shared thoughtfully. The family did not measure success by expansion or recognition. They measured it by continuity with integrity. The next generation did not inherit certainty but capability. They understood the land. They understood its limits. They understood their role, and that understanding prepared them for a future that would demand new answers. The farm had survived because it never stood still. Each generation faced conditions its predecessors could not have predicted. Markets shifted. Weather patterns changed. Technology advanced. The land remained, but everything around it evolved. The current generation understood this clearly. They did not inherit a finished system. They inherited a responsibility that required constant attention. Modern tools reshaped daily work. Precision equipment reduced waste. Data helped refine decisions, once guided only by observation. Sensors measured moisture. Forecasts informed timing. These tools did not replace judgment. They enhanced it. The family remained cautious about adoption. New technology was tested before being trusted. Reliability mattered more than novelty. The land continued to guide decisions. Renewable practices gained attention, not as trends but as long-term strategy. Energy costs fluctuated. Dependence on external systems carried risk. The family explored options that aligned with stability. Solar installations appeared first. Modest, practical, scaled to need. They offset energy use without overwhelming the farm's landscape. The family evaluated results carefully. Efficiency improved. Costs stabilized. Independence increased slightly. These changes reinforced confidence. Water management continued to evolve. Conservation techniques reduced waste. Infrastructure improvements increased reliability. The family planned not just for average seasons but for extremes. Resilience mattered. Crop selection reflected this thinking. Diversity increased again not for novelty, but for protection. No single failure would threaten the entire operation. The land responded well to this approach. Soil health remained central. Regenerative practices were refined. Cover crops diversified. Organic matter increased steadily. The family monitored progress patiently. Markets continued to change. Consumer preferences evolved. Sustainability gained attention. The family remained grounded. They did not chase labels or certifications blindly. They pursued practices that made sense for their land. Trust mattered more than marketing. Direct communication with buyers strengthened. Transparency remained a priority. The farm's reputation grew quietly. Education played a larger role. Younger generations brought formal training. Older generations contributed lived experience. Together, they evaluated information critically. Not every innovation improved outcomes. Some added complexity without benefit. The family learned to say no. This discipline preserved clarity. Succession planning matured further. Roles were clearly defined. Authority transitioned gradually. The farm operated with continuity rather than disruption. This stability supported long-term investment. The family prepared for uncertainty without fear. They accepted that farming would always involve risk. Their goal was not to eliminate it, but to manage it responsibly. The land remained central. Every decision was tested against its impact on soil, water, and long-term viability. This consistency anchored the farm. Community relationships remained important. Knowledge exchange continued. Cooperation adapted. The family did not isolate themselves. They shared experiences, learned from others, contributed insight where helpful. The farm remained part of a living system. As years passed, the land reflected careful stewardship. Fields held their structure. Crops recovered from stress. Wildlife presence stabilized. The family observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. They did not view the farm as complete. It was still growing. Legacy was not a finished product. It was a process. The family measured success by continuity with integrity. They understood that the future would challenge them again. But they were prepared, because they had learned to adapt without abandoning principles. The land would continue to demand care, and they were ready to answer. The work did not end in the fields. It ended at the table. That table had changed over time. Once rough and small, built for function rather than comfort, it had grown sturdier, wider, shaped by years of use. Scratches marked moments of haste. Worn edges reflected countless meals shared without ceremony. Food arrived there, quietly. No one announced its journey. No one listed the effort behind it. Yet every meal carried history. Grain harvested months earlier. Vegetables grown through careful planning. Meat prepared with respect for what had been raised. Each element represented decisions made long before the plate was filled. Dinner was where the farm finally paused. Conversation unfolded naturally. Sometimes it focused on the day's work. Sometimes it drifted elsewhere. Silence was command comfortable. The family ate with understanding. They knew what it took to bring food to that moment. They knew what had gone right and what had nearly failed. They knew which decisions had mattered most. This knowledge changed how they ate. Food was not rushed. Waste was rare. Gratitude did not need to be spoken, it was practiced. The table gathered generations together. Older hands that once carried heavy loads now rested. Younger hands listened, learned, and occasionally challenged. Experience met curiosity. Stories surfaced naturally. Not formal histories, but moments remembered because they mattered. A year when frost came early. A drought that tested resolve. A harvest that surprised everyone. A decision that changed the farm's direction. These stories did not glorify hardship. They explained it. Children learned through listening. They understood that farming was not a single effort but a chain of choices. The land was present in every conversation, even when not named. It existed in the food itself. The family understood that this connection was rare now. Many people ate without knowing where food came from. That distance was not wrong, but it changed perspective. Here, at this table, the distance was short. The family did not believe this made them better. It made them responsible. They understood that eating was not separate from working. Consumption completed the cycle. Dinner was not the reward, it was the continuation. The farm's story did not belong only to those who worked it. It extended outward to every person nourished by its effort. The family reflected on this often. They had fed neighbors, communities, cities they would never visit, people who would never know their names. That anonymity did not diminish meaning. It reinforced it. The work mattered, regardless of recognition. The land had taught that lesson early. As time passed, faces at the table changed. Some chairs emptied. Orders filled. Loss was acknowledged quietly. Presence appreciated more fully. The farm endured because the family understood impermanence. They did not cling to control. They planned for continuity. Dinner remained the one moment when work paused entirely. No equipment demanded attention. No weather decisions needed making. No markets required monitoring. Just food, conversation, rest. This pause mattered. It reminded the family why the work existed in the first place. Not to expand endlessly, not to dominate land, but to sustain life. The table anchored everything. Looking back, the family could trace their story clearly, from untouched land to first harvest, from isolation to community, from muscle to machines, from crisis to adaptation, from ownership to stewardship. Each phase built upon the last. The land remembered all of it. It remembered mistakes and care alike. It responded honestly. It shaped decisions. The family understood now that legacy was not a monument. It was behavior repeated over time. Every generation added something. None completed it. The future remained uncertain. Farming would continue to change. Climate would challenge. Markets would shift. But the foundation was strong, because the family had learned how to listen to the land, to each other, to experience. Dinner would continue to be served. Food would continue to arrive at the table, carrying more than nourishment. It would carry memory. It would carry responsibility. It would carry the quiet story of soil worked carefully, decisions made deliberately, an effort given without expectation of applause. The land would continue to give so long as it was respected, and as long as Diener told that story, the farm's legacy would remain alive. And so, the story returns to where it began, not in the fields, not in the seasons, but at the table. The land is spoken through generations, through hardship and harvest, through silence and care. It has carried memory in every layer of soil, answering effort with patience, and patience with life. This family's story is not unique because of its scale, or its success, or its name. It is meaningful because it reminds us of something easily forgotten. That food has a history, that land remembers how it is treated, and that the quiet work of ordinary people can shape lives far beyond what they ever see. Long after the tools are set down, long after the fields change hands, the legacy remains in soil, in the meals it provides, and in the understanding passed from one generation to the next. As this story comes to rest, the land continues its work. Seeds will be planted again. Seasons will turn, and somewhere, another table will be set. Thank you for spending this time with us, walking through the fields of the past and listening to the story the land still tells. Until our next journey through history, may your nights be peaceful, and may every meal remind you that every beginning starts in the soil.